Hello and welcome to CTV News Across Canada for Thursday, March 13th. We've got the top local stories from coast to coast, stories that affect you and the country. Thanks for joining us.
They withdrew their little threat.
That little threat was the Ontario Premier's pause on a 25% surcharge on electricity sent from his province to the U.S.
Canada's absolutely one of the worst, and we, when I say worst in terms of charging tariffs.
Despite that criticism from the U.S. president, the threat from Doug Ford may be paying off, landing that premier a meeting with the U.S. Commerce Secretary on Thursday.
Our message down there tomorrow is let's stop this. It's going to hurt both economies. It's American people that are going to get hurt.
The conversation tomorrow will be what can we do to deal with this completely unjustified application of tariffs to steel and aluminum from Canada that came into effect today.
Canada's finance minister will attend Thursday's meeting after Ottawa hit the U.S. with $29.8 billion in reciprocal tariffs in response to 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. The new tariffs announced hours before premiers met on the issue, Alberta's premier calling that meeting a frank and healthy conversation, emphasizing her plan to pursue a primarily diplomatic approach to avoid escalation.
We've already seen what a combative approach produces, which is escalation, which again is going to result in more job losses, higher tariffs, counter tariffs, retaliatory tariffs all day long.
Alberta's trade minister defends the premier's push for diplomacy, underscoring there is no chance Alberta will consider counter taxes.
The premier's been very clear that she won't support an export tax on Alberta's energy.
Politically, that's where the pressure comes because, you can't just sort of sit back and necessarily be perceived as taking it.
This political scientist says it's impossible to say whether it's Smith's good cop or Ford's bad cop strategy that is working.
What's the payoff to these strategies? And it's hard to say because, we'll see if Doug Ford gets anything permanent out of all this tomorrow.
Smith returns to Alberta from the U.S. tonight. Shailan Skolsky, CTV News, Edmonton.
This project is dead. There's no way that it's going to be viable going forward.
Economist Moshe Lander isn't pulling punches when speaking about Northvolt. He says the latest news appears to be another nail in the coffin. Today, Northvolt filed for bankruptcy in Sweden, and while it says its North American subsidiary is solvent, Lander says that doesn't mean Quebec's electric battery plant will still go ahead.
Solvency means that the assets are greater than the liabilities. That's it.
For months, the future of the $7 billion Northvolt project has been up in the air. In September, the Swedish company laid off 20% of its workforce. Northvolt's CEO and founder resigned 2 months later, and the company filed for bankruptcy protection in the U.S. The Quebec factory was being built in Saint-Basil-le-Grand, and the province has a lot of money tied up in it. The Legault government has invested $270 million in the company. It also loaned Northvolt $240 million to buy the land. And the Caisse de dépôt, Quebec's pension fund manager, invested $200 million in the Swedish company. In a statement, Quebec's economy and energy minister Christine Frechette said the government is hoping a buyer will step in and relaunch the project. Adding, although the $270 million invested in the parent company has lost its value, the $240 million loan is guaranteed by collateral on the land and assets. We are evaluating our options and we will exercise our rights in the event of a liquidation of assets in Quebec. With a tariff war in play and the U.S. moving away from EVs, the executive director of the Trottier Energy Institute, Louis Baumier, says Quebec simply can't compete without American support.
Would international investors come here to invest in that specific project without knowing that there would be some consumers for the product? I doubt it.
Lander agrees and says exporting to Asia and Europe likely wouldn't last.
At some point, somebody in those regions is going to come along and say, well, why do we have to get it from Canada? We can build that industry on our own.
Baumier says Quebec could still have a future in batteries, just not for electric vehicles.
We could develop some sort of a niche market, energy storage in the electrical grid, for example.
In the meantime, the future of Northvolt in Quebec lies in the hands of a bankruptcy trustee. Angela McKenzie, CTV News.
It was just after 8 this morning when the 911 calls came in.
It was a huge fire. It was going really, it was bad. There was smoke everywhere.
Police were the first to arrive on scene at 70 McGregor Street near King and Simcoe in Oshawa.
When our crews arrived on scene, they encountered heavy smoke and flames from all levels of the house.
Firefighters arrived minutes later. The blaze quickly upgraded to a 2-alarm fire.
Just heard them say there was a child in there, and then my heart dropped.
Firefighters worked to gain access to the burning home. They could be seen entering through a second-story window, moments later returning, holding the limp body of a young girl.
They had the little girl, but they also had her sister in their arms, one of the firemen. And they gave it to an ambulance, and they all took off.
2 girls and their mother were pulled from the fire.
At this time, I can confirm the 46-year-old female has been pronounced deceased, and 9-year-old female has also been pronounced deceased.
A 12-year-old girl was taken to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. The 56-year-old husband and father managed to get out of the home on his own and was also rushed to hospital. Police say they are both in life-threatening condition.
It is a tough day for everyone. It's tough for the crews. It's tough for the officers.
Now the focus shifts to investigating how and why the fire started.
There's significant structural damage to the inside of the house. The second floor is collapsed into the main floor, and the main floor is collapsed partially into the basement.
Investigators from the Ontario Fire Marshal's office are on scene.
I think just in the chaos of what was happening in the moment, nobody has reported to me that they heard any smoke alarms, but that doesn't mean that they weren't there or they were there. I'm not sure.
Whether or not there were working smoke alarms at the time of the fire will be a key part of the investigation.
There is some indication that one of the occupants was awoken by smoke alarms.
Into why not everyone managed to make it out on their own.
If they had working smoke alarms, they should have been able to evacuate the house safely.
In the meantime, 2 people are dead, 2 others are in hospital, and the neighborhood is in mourning.
It's just very sad. It's just sad.
Now, fire investigators tell CTV News that the family dog also died in the fire. Give you some indication of just how strong the smoke and flames were when first responders arrived. We're told several first responders actually had to be taken to hospital to be checked for smoke inhalation, all expected to be okay. Reporting live in Oshawa, I'm Scott Lightfoot. Nathan and Natalie, back to you.
Thank you, Scott.
RCMP officers along with police service dogs canvassed through Calgary's domestic terminal at the airport Wednesday morning. Mounties made a beeline for Gate A22, servicing a WestJet flight to Ottawa, slated for a 10:45 a.m. takeoff to investigate a security threat.
Figured it was just an unruly passenger or something, and then I just sat there waiting. Next thing you know, you see sniffer dogs outside the plane. They're walking up the ramp into the cargo hold.
Passengers who were waiting to board the aircraft but never did began taking photos and videos capturing the search by officers. All of them were told they would have to leave the terminal and re-enter through security again.
They said that there was some sort of security breach and that they needed us all to exit out through the A gate and that we'd have to go through the whole process again.
We all head back through security. They start swabbing hands for maybe some chemical residue.
Nicholas Mondu was in Calgary for a ski trip and to visit family. He was headed home with his family, and now they have to find alternative travel plans.
It's a little alarming, you know, like I've never been on a flight before with officers, let alone like canines showing up.
Passengers were told nearly 4 hours after their departure that their flight switched from delayed to canceled just after 2 p.m.
Like they could have given us, you know, a bit of a better alternative, you know, instead of making us wait 4.5 hours only to delay the flight.
Some passengers were rebooked on flights Wednesday evening, while others were slated to fly out Thursday morning. RCMP have not said what alerted them to the threat or the nature of it. Now, WestJet does say it is working with the airport along with RCMP. Calgary's airport authority says while this investigation is ongoing, there is no active threat to the airport, and operations here remain steady with minimal impact to passengers and travelers here. Tara.
Okay, Tyson, thank you.
Brazen stabbings by strangers in downtown Vancouver this summer triggered growing safety concerns and public pressure to expand involuntary care. Wednesday, the NDP government unveiled its response.
This is about providing a higher level of care to a very specific and vulnerable population.
Involuntary care has already been available in instances of mental health and brain injuries, but Dr. Vigo, tasked by the province with reviewing the issue, says the impact of increasingly toxic drugs has been overlooked, and substance use, a factor that previously often disqualified involuntary care, shouldn't.
Evolution of our understanding of this has changed because of the dramatic impact of toxic drugs on our brains.
It turns out the province says the law didn't need to change, just a recognition that street drugs on their own can cause impairment, warranting involuntary care. And the medical community is being given that guidance.
And I want to be very clear. There are no changes being made to the Mental Health Act at this time.
The Vancouver area network of drug users held a news conference Tuesday bristling at expansion of involuntary care to drug use. It says the plan is motivated by politics, not compassion, and says voluntary detox and care should be the priority.
Why not take the people that want to go first, right? So to me, it was just a ploy, I believe, to get people to vote for them.
On the other hand, opposition MLA Eleanor Sturco introduced a private member's bill Wednesday seeking to expand the law, requiring doctors to contact family when a patient suffers a mental health crisis. She says the family of the man charged in a violent Surrey home invasion last month contacted her and wished they could have relayed information about his mental health.
Families want to be able to provide that context to help.
The province is opening involuntary beds later this month at Surrey Pretrial Centre and later this spring in Maple Ridge as it tries to expand its application of this controversial law.
A novel opioid has been detected in Nova Scotia for the first time.
It is a synthetic opioid. It's about 2 times stronger than fentanyl.
The drug, which was found in the Amherst area, was described as a brownish rock with a powder and grainy texture. According to RCMP, the sample contained a mix of fentanyl, cocaine, furanyl, xylazine, which is a tranquilizer, and caffeine.
What we need to be afraid of is when we are putting something into our body and we don't know what it is or what effect it will have on us.
This opioid wasn't found during a drug investigation, but rather one for a stolen dirt bike.
When we took the individual into custody, we did a search back at the office and we found numerous drugs, multiple drugs on this individual.
The initial arrest took place in December, but it took months to determine just what the drugs were.
We always have a concern for what's in the drug supply. Let's face it, it's, you're not buying something that's regulated. You're not buying something that's, been inspected.
Now that the drug has crossed into the province, there are concerns it will spread.
We're closest to the border, so when things start to filter into Nova Scotia, lots of times it's first, comes through here. And it's been that way for other drugs when meth was first introduced to this area.
It's something police will be keeping a close eye on.
We are being vigilant and we do take this very, very seriously. Anytime that any new drug comes into a community, it's very alarming.
Another concern with this drug in particular.
Naloxone is excellent at reversing opioid overdoses, but it won't help if it isn't an opioid. So it won't help with benzo or tranquilizer or stimulant toxicity.
RCMP say the person who was caught with the drug has been sentenced to 4 years in prison. Stephanie Seco, CTV News, Halifax.
Well, I looked out my front window and I saw people dancing on the streets, so I knew something had happened.
Relief for Robert Carberry and his neighbors in Nepean after months of pushing back against City Hall.
There's all kinds of guidelines and processes and things that should happen in terms of consultations and letting people see plans that establish a social contract between the citizens and the government. And in this case, that social contract was absolutely shattered.
Carberry lives minutes away from one of the proposed sites for a sprung structure the city planned on building to house asylum seekers coming to Canada.
We really had lost trust and faith in the city and the way this whole thing folded out from the beginning.
But that plan is no longer happening.
That's a black eye for the city, but hopefully the lessons learned and that never happens again.
In a memo released Wednesday, the city says changing immigration trends and additional transitional housing options have eliminated the need for the newcomer reception centers.
Over the course of the last couple of months, we've received new information about the numbers of people who are arriving in Ottawa. That number has gone down.
Since the city isn't going ahead with the planned newcomer centers like the one here at 1645 Woodruff Avenue or at 40 Hearst Way, instead, they're pivoting to existing community spaces like the YMCA and the Graham Spry building here at 250 Lanark Avenue.
For the newcomers, it's going to be a permanent building. I like that a whole lot better than, some sort of structure in the middle of a park and ride.
The mayor says he thinks this is the right move.
If we can focus on welcoming those people who are coming to our city and stay away from politicizing some of the solutions that were proposed in the past, then I think that's a good outcome.
Residents like Carberry hoping for more transparency from the city going forward.
We're all for doing the right thing for homeless people and for the asylum seekers, but it should be a solution that's also good for surrounding communities, surrounding businesses.
And the city is purchasing up to 20 homes around Ottawa to use for transitional housing. And this spring, 290 new permanent beds will be added between the St. Joseph Boulevard and Queen Street transitional housing programs. Patricia.
And the controversy is put to bed. CTV's Kimberly Fowler live for us tonight.
For Sylvia Moocher, looking after her husband Kenneth is like a full-time job. The 92-year-old is living with a number of health issues.
He's got 3 types of cancer, 4 pinpoint strokes, heart problem, water around the lung with cancer particles. He has to drain it out once a month.
Sylvia says she can't do as much as she used to, like when she tries to sit him up in bed.
I used to pull him by the arms, and I says, no, I can't do that anymore. It hurts, like he's heavy.
So for the last 2 weeks, they've had home care workers come to the house 4 times a day to lend a hand. But Sylvia says she's noticed they're always in a hurry.
They rushed in and do this, and that, and before you know it, they're gone.
Sylvia says she's been told by multiple home care workers they can only stay for 15 minutes, and that includes travel time between appointments. In some cases, she says they're coming from across the neighborhood. She says it doesn't leave enough time to properly care for Kenneth.
That's a long ways between stop signs and lights and everything.
A spokesperson from the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority sent CTV News this statement. Timing of home care visits is based on ensuring that clients receive the most appropriate care possible for their needs. All staff working in home care have guidelines to follow for their scheduled visits based on client assessments, but those times can be altered depending on the immediate needs of a client. Sylvia Moocher is trying to get Kenneth into a care home. She hasn't heard yet if a bed is available.
I've been in tears for 2 years.
Sylvia Moocher did tell us that one of the home care workers they had come today stayed for 20 minutes and was very helpful.
Jeff, is there anyone Sylvia can speak to about her concerns?
The health authority says it encourages families to speak with their case coordinator if they have any concerns that need to be addressed.
All right, thanks for this, Jeff.
Complicated.
That's how Maggie Chen describes the current real estate market. The president of the Windsor-Essex County Association of Realtors is encouraged by the 0.25% drop in the interest rate Wednesday.
If the borrowing costs decreases, which means affordability goes up, and it means that the activity will pick up historically.
Chen says a robust spring market was forecasted, but investors are holding off because tariffs are making the economic environment complicated.
If you are worried about your job security, you might hold off any long-term financial commitment.
Al Valente of Valente's Travel says a lower interest rate may boost the travel sector, but the destinations are changing.
So maybe bypass the U.S. and go to places like Europe, for example. So it allows them to do that.
The Bank of Canada lowered interest rates for the 7th consecutive time after a survey showed people were more worried about job security and financial health and were planning to spend less. The bank's survey of 100 businesses found that many had lowered their sales outlook, with the decline most prominent in the manufacturing sector. Now, the trade uncertainty across the border has led many also to scale back on hiring and investment plans. A local staffing firm says there has been a 15% dip in hirings over the last couple of months, but according to Workforce Windsor Essex, job postings are up. including in the manufacturing field.
Looking at the first 11 days of March, if you compare it to the first 11 days of February, we're actually up 23% on job posting volume locally.
A prolonged trade war may increase the cost of goods and weaken consumer spending, but Falconer senses companies are going to keep on keeping on.
They're really just trying to keep their mind focused on getting that work done and shipping that work, and they're going to deal with the realities as they become clear.
Bob Belichico, CTV News.
I have meetings about 60 to 70% of the day.
Sarah Long is preparing for another 2 weeks of scrambling ahead after finding out her 2 kids that attend Elizabeth Ziegler Public School won't be returning to in-person classes until at least the end of the month.
Stressed if it extends into April. Now we're out of school for 4, 5, 6 weeks.
The school was closed on March 3rd over concerns about the safety of the building's facade, and the school board says it will remain closed until at least March 28th.
For the conversations I'm having with my management right now is not, don't worry about it, you work from home. It's, you're supposed to be online from 9 to 5 without interruption. So do you need to take a leave of absence for these days? Do you need to use your vacation for these days?
Today, workers could be seen removing material from the building and installing wood above the broken facade. According to the city, the school board has retained a structural engineer and is awaiting the engineer's final report. The board did not make anyone available for an interview today, but in a long statement, Associate Director of Business Services Bill Lemon says in part, specific findings from the testing and evaluations are still being assessed. Adding, as Elizabeth Ziegler Public School has more than 500 students, alternative spaces that supported the needs of students were not immediately available, and a great deal of planning was required to accommodate the student population.
That is the school board just wiping their hands of the problem. We have community centers, we have churches, we have other schools. If there are 20 classes in Elizabeth Ziegler, find 20 rooms. It feels like they didn't try hard enough to come up with a contingency plan here.
The board says it understands the concerns, but it is working tirelessly to return to in-person learning.
I don't feel that anybody is working tirelessly on this situation. I understand these safety concerns happen, and I'm very supportive of the school being closed for safety reasons for however long it takes. However, I think it's a lazy solution to say, now we're going to go to remote learning.
The board has asked families and caregivers to stop by the school to pick up a Chromebook or iPad, which Long adds won't be easy for her kids.
He's 5, so he needs a lot of attention. Leo's in grade 2. I think he'll be able to manage the Chromebook for a certain period of time, but by no means is he going to be able to sit there from 9 to 3 on a Chromebook.
Now, Long isn't the only parent that reached out to us today. At least 4 others weren't available for interviews because they were working, but they also shared that concern with those upcoming 2 weeks following this week. The school board says it is still working on a plan to try and get students back into the school as soon as possible. But again, it will be at least another 2 weeks until students have the potential for returning to in-person classes. Tony.
Okay, Colton Weens with new reporting on that school closure live in Waterloo tonight. Thanks, Colton.
Hundreds of workers at Regina's Everest steel plant are questioning their future as American tariffs on steel take effect.
Today is a tough day for us steelworkers. It's the day we saw it coming, but hoped it would never arrive. My message to Donald Trump is to stop. You have to stop. You're hurting both Canadian and American economy, as well as workers in both countries.
In Saskatoon, Premier Scott Moe said his government is working on a plan to support the steel industry.
To mitigate any negative consequences, and are there actually opportunities for us to push through these independently using the tools that we have, maybe Crown Corporation procurement, things of that nature.
The province is also examining the amount of Canadian steel and other local content going into government capital projects. Josh Levy has developed an AI platform that construction companies are currently using to assess tariff risk.
It does become an exercise in the mitigation strategy. And so in the case of your government, it does sound like they're willing to consider maybe how they can get to a win-win scenario to maybe minimize the disruption to the project and find a way to, make some good out of what's otherwise a disruptive time.
At the legislature, the NDP opposition called for construction of a pipeline to the East Coast, a project that would require industry and government support from across Canada.
Our steelworkers deserve support. They deserve a government that will fight back and take bold action to secure Saskatchewan's economic future. Evraz and the workers in it are national assets.
The government says any plan to support the steel industry could come soon. One of the earliest opportunities would be in next week's provincial budget. Wayne Mantika, CTV News, Regina.